What if I told you the biggest bank robbery in modern history didn't require a single bullet? No alarms, no broken vaults, just a digital backdoor and people smart enough to walk right through it. This isn't fiction. It's how over $937 million disappeared and no one stopped it. Before headlines screamed about the missing millions. Before the banks noticed a single irregularity. There was only a man and a laptop. His name wasn't known to the public. Not yet. Internally, in obscure forums and encrypted chat rooms, they called him the Architect. By day, his life was painfully normal. He lived in a mid-sized apartment outside of Tallinn, Estonia. He wore plain clothes, worked freelance gigs in cybersecurity, and took care of his mother, who believed her son was simply a quiet, gifted coder. In many ways, he was. But what no one knew was that he wasn't coding for clients anymore. He was studying banking infrastructure, not from the outside, from the inside. It started small. He began reverse engineering legacy banking APIs, tracing transaction patterns, and mapping out how data moved between core systems. He wasn't looking for passwords, wasn't looking for firewalls to break. He was looking for blind spots. The cracks that no one in a suit ever cared to patch. One night, after weeks of simulating microtransactions on sandbox environments, he found something. A delay. Just milliseconds. But in a world of automated finance, that tiny lag between confirmation and verification was a goldmine. He tested it again and again. It wasn't a glitch. It was a vulnerability baked into dozens of major bank systems across the globe. A relic of old code running under shiny new software layers. He knew then this wasn't just a technical flaw. It was an opportunity. But he also knew he couldn't pull it off alone. That's when he turned to an elite circle of coders, traders, and digital forgers, each with their own role. They didn't meet in person, so they used aliases, spoke in code, and operated like a decentralized organism. One member, an ex-Wall Street quant, ran simulations to predict exactly how much could be skimmed before detection. Another forged digital identities to mimic legitimate account holders. Third specialized in transaction cloaking, ensuring the flows appeared as routine internal transfers. No one asked each other's real names. No one wanted to know. The plan was simple in theory, but flawless in execution. Instead of stealing large sums from one place, they would siphon tiny amounts. Cents, even fractions of cents. From hundreds of thousands of accounts across multiple banks, but not all at once. Their withdrawals were scheduled based on AI-driven behavioral patterns, striking only when the account holder wouldn't notice, or when another larger transaction could mask the movement. This wasn't theft. This was digital erosion, slow, silent, and undetectable. By the end of month one, they had pulled in just over $90,000. No flags, no alerts, no trace. The architect knew they had just created the perfect crime, and the world hadn't even blinked. Success in crime breeds one thing faster than money: confidence. After that first month, the architect and his decentralized crew knew they had built something unprecedented. But $90,000 was only a proof of concept. Their real plan was far more ambitious. Not to steal money, but to reroute it, slowly, methodically, from under the financial system's nose. $1 billion was never the goal. It was the byproduct of how good they'd become. The operation shifted into its next phase. They expanded their targets to include Tier 1 banks in the United States, Singapore, and Germany. They adjusted their algorithms to account for international transaction timings, holidays, and audit gaps. Every detail mattered, down to the time of day when account monitoring systems were least active. By month 4, it infected 92 banking institutions, all without triggering a single red flag. Their software was built to mimic bank behavior, using machine learning to adapt to each platform's quirks. It wasn't just a heist anymore. It was a ghost system layered on top of the real one. It's perfectly camouflaged. And yet within the group, tensions began to grow. One member, known only as Spectre, argued that they should pull out. $230 million is enough, he typed into their encrypted chat. We're getting sloppy. But the architect refused, not out of greed, but out of obsession. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about proving that the institutions everyone trusted could be dismantled invisibly. That the smartest people in the room weren't wearing suits. They were sitting in dark rooms, lit only by screens, rewriting the rules. And as the operation scaled, so did the psychological. Told, one of the foragers stopped responding to messages. Another was seen liquidating crypto positions and posting vague tweets about being done with it all. Though they were winning, the crew began to fracture under the weight of what they were doing. They weren't just stealing from banks. They were destabilizing people's lives. Behind each cent stolen was a real person, a family, a small business, a student loan account. And that's when the first disruption hit. A small bank in Helsinki noticed a pattern in their logs, a recurring discrepancy of a few cents in over 10,000 transactions. Nothing huge, but enough for an audit. Led to a freeze. That freeze triggered a report to the European Central Bank. And then, like dominoes reports, it began surfacing in other regions. The architect had predicted every technical scenario, but he hadn't accounted for human paranoia with regulators. On high alert, banks started locking down. Firewalls were raised. Transactional AI began looking not just for large withdrawals, but for behavioral anomalies. And still, the group pushed forward. By month 7, it passed $937 million in rerouted funds. But now, every move felt like a countdown. And the question wasn't, how much more can we take? It was, how much longer can we stay invisible? It started with a name. Not a code name. Not a screen name. A real name. A journalist from Berlin, investigating discrepancies in local bank reports, stumbled upon a pattern. In digging through leaked documents and whistleblower tips, he discovered a series of microtransactions linked to accounts opened by a Lithuanian freelance developer, someone who had curiously done cybersecurity work for several banks in the Baltics. The name? Lukas Olive, a quiet man living outside of Talent. The story wasn't published, not yet. But within days, word spread in digital crime circles. Someone was getting close. Dangerously close. And for the first time, the group wasn't ahead of the system. They were being hunted by it. That's when the panic set in. One member, Ghost Tag, vanished. Deleted all profiles, burned every device, disappeared like he'd never existed. Another Neazoro tried to transfer his share to an offshore account, and it was intercepted. Funds frozen. Account flagged. A formal investigation had begun, and it was international. For months, the operation had been invisible. Now it was unraveling in real time. But perhaps the most painful unraveling was internal, psychological Lukas. The architect stopped sleeping. He became paranoid, hearing phantom knocks on the door, jumping at every system alert on his screen. He knew the entire structure they built could collapse from a single IP leak. And worse, he began to feel something unexpected. Guilt, he started. Reviewing past logs, not just for evidence, but for victims. He traced one of the microtransactions to a small savings account in Kansas. It belonged to a 72-year-old woman. The transaction was only $1.84, but her account had just over $200 total. And that $1.84 had pushed her below the threshold for a senior benefits rebate. She had called her bank confused, but nothing had been flagged. That single moment broke him. This wasn't about digital erosion anymore. It was about real consequences. They had created a crime so perfect, so subtle, that even the victims never knew they were victims. They just ... lost a little more hope, a little more stability, quietly, invisibly. Meanwhile, the investigation was expanding across continents. Governments were mobilizing joint cybercrime task forces. Banks were deploying emergency AI countermeasures. Every dollar moved was now being tracked, traced. Then came the breach. One of their internal channels, assumed to be secure, was compromised. It wasn't just communication that leaked. It was logs, code repositories, and partial wallet addresses. The operation had left fingerprints, and now someone had them. It was no longer a matter of if they'd be caught, only when. and how many would fall with it. The architect realized he had one final move, but it wouldn't be about escape. It would be about control of the narrative, of the damage, of the legacy. Because if this was the end, it had to mean something. They always say every empire falls from the inside, and this one was no different. The architect, once calm and calculated, now lived in fear. He deleted everything, changed continents, grew a beard, moved into a rented cabin in the Norwegian countryside. But it didn't matter anymore. The walls were closing in. Not with sirens, not with arrests, but with silence. The kind of silence that only comes when every back door you once controlled starts to shut. One by one, the leak had gone public. A GitHub repository tied to the operation was exposed by a cybersecurity analyst on X, formerly Twitter. And within 72 hours, every major financial institution was running emergency audits based on that code. CNN picked up the story, then Vice, then Wired. Digital Hydra. How one group bled nearly $1 billion from global banks. Lucas's face wasn't on the cover yet, but the manhunt had begun. Interpol, Europol, NSA, each one following trails of obfuscated addresses, encrypted messages, and digital fingerprints. But what shocked the world more than the scale of the theft was the philosophy behind it. Embedded within the group's communication logs, which were now public, was a manifesto. We didn't do this because we needed money. We did it because the system was never meant to be fair. We trusted the wrong people, and they trusted broken code. It wasn't just a crime. It was a statement. And for millions watching online, it sparked something dangerous. Admiration. TikToks started appearing romanticizing the operation. YouTubers created explainers with titles like How They Outsmarted the Banks or Why the Architect Might Be Right. But the reality behind the screens was far from glamorous. Of the original team, at least 5 had been arrested in separate countries. One had taken their own life before extradition. Another was reportedly working with authorities. In exchange for a reduced sentence, and Lucas, he surrendered, not with handcuffs, but with a public confession. In a 12-minute video uploaded anonymously to a server in Iceland, Lucas appeared, face exposed, and told the world everything. Calm, measured, and without regret, he ended with a line that echoed across the internet. I didn't steal $1 billion. I exposed a system that lets it disappear. The fallout was immediate. Global banks implemented new protocols. Governments called for unified digital infrastructure. On the public, they were divided. Some outraged, others inspired. But the true damage was psychological. Trust had been broken. Unlike stolen money, trust couldn't be reimbursed. So now you've heard the story, not of a thief, but of a system failure no one saw coming. The question isn't how it happened. It's whether something like this is already happening again. It's quietly and visibly right now. If this shook you, even just a little, share this video. Someone you know still believes the system is bulletproof, and they need to know. Nothing is untouchable anymore.